Welcome to the Morning Walk with Murdy Digital Stroll.
It is great to be here.
So, I want you to just picture this scene for a second because it's honestly one of the most striking visuals you will ever come across in any of our deep dives.
Oh, it really is. It sets the stage perfectly.
Right. So imagine an illiterate farmer, and he's from one of the poorest countries on earth. He's wearing this traditional long brown smock, and he just walks right into the United States Capitol building.
And we should point out, he doesn't speak a single word of English.
Not a word. But he is there to address members of Congress. He's in a room packed wall to wall with, international agricultural experts, people with PhDs.
The top minds in the field, basically.
Exactly. And his topic for the day is how to save millions of people from starvation.
Yeah, it's incredible.
His name is Yakuba Sawadogo. And I think the wildest part of this entire scenario is that 30 years before he was giving this masterclass in Washington, his own neighbors literally called him a madman.
Yeah, they really did. But to understand how this, peasant farmer ended up schooling the world's top agronomists, we have to look at the ecological nightmare he was navigating.
Right. The historical context here is brutal.
It really is. So between 1972 and 1984, the Sahel region of Africa, that's that vast semi-arid stretch sitting just below the Sahara Desert, they experienced droughts that just fundamentally broke the environment.
I mean, looking at the sources, we are talking about an 80% drop in rainfall.
Exactly. An 80% drop, 100,000 people starved to death.
God, that's just a staggering number.
It is. And tens of millions of people abandoned their ancestral homes. They were just, flooding into cities just to find drinking water. The Sahara Desert was physically expanding southward, just swallowing West Africa mile by mile.
And scientists at the time, they were looking at the data and predicting the entire region would become completely uninhabitable.
Yeah, total dead zone.
But reading through our sources for today's deep dive, the main villain wasn't just the lack of rain, right? It was what actually happened to the physical ground itself.
Right. The soil underwent this process that agronomists refer to as forming hard pan.
Hard pan, which sounds exactly like what it is.
It really does. So when you have intense heat, lack of moisture, and heavy winds stripping away all the top layer of organic matter, the remaining soil essentially bakes. It turns into the ceramic crust.
Like actual pottery.
Basically, yeah. It's completely compacted and just devoid of life. Plows literally snap against it. But the real catastrophe is the surface tension.
Because the water can't get in.
Exactly. When rain finally does fall on hard pan, the water can't penetrate. It simply runs off the surface as if it were hitting, a slanted slab of asphalt, and it takes any remaining loose topsoil right with it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because as someone who looks at how systems scale and fail, faced with an ecological collapse of this magnitude, the knee-jerk reaction for global governments is always to throw massive, highly funded, modern solutions at it.
Oh, inevitably. They want a quick tech fix.
Right. The international community sees 1 million square miles of concrete-like soil, and they just, they send in the cavalry.
And that Western response was to treat the Sahel like a brute force engineering problem. Yeah. Which is the antithesis of foundational wisdom.
Total brute force. They're auditing the problem and saying, we need more power.
Exactly. So agricultural experts flew in from Europe and America, bringing the full arsenal of the mid-20th century Green Revolution.
The heavy machinery.
Oh, yeah. They shipped in these massive, heavy diesel tractors to try and literally rip the earth open. They imported thousands of tons of synthetic chemical fertilizers.
And the irrigation, right?
Yes. They designed these incredibly complex, expensive irrigation systems. In total, they spent billions of dollars in foreign aid trying to force the desert to bloom.
And reading the post-mortem on this era in the sources, it was a colossal failure. I mean, the billions spent did not stop the desert by a single inch.
Not an inch.
But looking at the mechanics of this, I want to challenge that slightly, or at least dig into it. Because, chemistry alters matter, right?
Sure.
Even if the soil was hard, surely dumping thousands of tons of synthetic nitrogen and phosphorus did something to the soil composition.
Well, it did absolutely nothing, because chemistry requires a medium.
Wait, what do you mean?
Well, to alter the cellular growth of a plant, those synthetic fertilizers need to dissolve in moisture so they can be, taken up by the root systems.
Oh, right, because of the hard pan.
Exactly. Because the soil was locked in that hard pan state, the water was just running off the surface. So the expensive chemical fertilizers simply washed away with the runoff. Or if it didn't rain, they just dried into dust and blew away in the Saharan winds.
That is just a massive systems failure. They completely misdiagnosed the underlying mechanics of the ecosystem. So they were basically trying to water a paved driveway by driving a heavier truck over it.
That is a great way to picture it.
Right, because you're just pressing the asphalt down harder.
And that is precisely what happened with the tractors.
Mm.
Heavy machinery exerts immense downward pressure on the earth.
Right.
So when you roll a massive diesel tractor over soil that is already suffering from compaction, you are locking the hard pan down even tighter.
You're sealing it.
Yes. They were utilizing the exact wrong tools, exacerbating the physical problem they were actually trying to solve. They ignored the natural rhythms of the earth completely.
Which brings us back to Yakuba Sawadogo. Because while billions of dollars were failing, and, while his neighbors were fleeing their villages for the cities, Yakuba did the exact opposite.
He stayed.
He went back to the land. The sources mention he had this successful market stall, like a real future in business. But he abandoned it to return to farming during literally the worst drought in 2 centuries.
And his approach was rooted in pure Gurukul 2.0 wisdom. He decided to revive an ancient, almost entirely forgotten agricultural technique called zai.
Zai.
Yeah, zai.
Yeah.
It's a method that had been used in the region centuries prior. But Yakuba didn't just blindly copy the old ways. He observed the changing climate, and he modified the technique.
Right. He audited the current environment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He started digging his zai pits significantly wider and deeper than the traditional method dictated.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because digging these pits wasn't some gentle morning gardening session.
Definitely not.
The sources state he was out there digging thousands of holes during the dry season, when the ground was at its absolute hardest.
When it's basically rock.
Right. And from an energy standpoint, if you're a starving man in 120-degree heat, swinging a pickaxe into concrete earth is a massive waste of calories. Why not just wait a few months for the rain to soften the earth first?
Because if you wait for the rain, you've already lost. Yes. If the ground is still a ceramic crust when the storm hits, the water runs off immediately.
Oh, of course. The surface tension.
Exactly. The entire philosophy of the zai method is that you have to prepare the architecture of the soil to catch the water before it actually arrives.
You have to build the infrastructure first.
Precisely. But, his neighbors thought he had completely lost his mind.
I mean, I would too.
Right. And not just because of the intense labor, but because of what he put inside those pits. After digging these wide cavities in the dead earth, he filled each one with a handful of raw manure and straw. And then he just sat back and waited.
He didn't plant a single seed.
Not one.
But if you put raw manure and dry straw into dead, baked earth during a drought, you aren't feeding a plant. You're setting out a buffet.
You're issuing an invitation.
You're trying to attract something, like bugs.
Termites. And this is the profound biological genius of the system. The manure was bait. By placing organic matter into these deep pits during the dry season, Yakuba sent a biological signal down into the earth.
A signal to the ecosystem.
Yes. Subterranean termite colonies, which are desperate for food in a barren landscape, they detected that organic matter. To reach it, they burrowed up from deep underground, tunneling relentlessly through that compacted hardpan.
That is just brilliant systems thinking. He essentially outsourced the heavy machinery to millions of tiny biological engineers.
That's exactly what he did.
The international experts were trying to break the soil from the top down using diesel weight, but the termites were loosening it from the bottom up.
Working with nature, not against it.
But wait, how does that replace the chemical fertilizers the Western experts brought in? I mean, loosening dirt doesn't add nutrients.
This is where we get into the chemical mechanics. Because termites don't just dig.
Right.
As they consume that roughage and manure, the complex biome of bacteria in their guts breaks down the cellulose. They excrete waste that is incredibly rich in available nitrogen, phosphorus, and vital micronutrients.
So they are literally manufacturing fertilizer.
Yes. Furthermore, as they tunnel, they create this intricate, sprawling network of macropores, basically tiny subterranean pipelines extending deep into the earth.
Wow.
So the termites are simultaneously providing the physical aeration the tractors couldn't achieve and synthesizing the organic fertilizer the chemicals completely failed to deliver.
That is unbelievable. It's like a perfectly optimized, self-sustaining loop. And the data from the sources backing this up is just staggering.
It really is.
When the seasonal rains finally arrived, Yakuba's fields acted like a giant sponge.
Yes.
On the flat, untreated hardpan right next to his land, the water only penetrated about 60 centimeters before running off. But inside Yakuba's zai pits, the water sank into those termite tunnels and penetrated up to 125 centimeters deep.
He essentially doubled the water retention capacity of the earth. The moisture was captured deep underground, shielded from the evaporating sun.
Which creates a perfect environment.
Exactly. A nutrient-dense reservoir for when he finally planted his seeds. His crops thrived while the surrounding landscape remained an absolute wasteland.
But his community didn't throw him a parade, did they?
Far from it.
They hated him. The traditional land chiefs actually ostracized him. There's a brutal quote in the sources where his neighbors tell him, "A man who digs holes is as useful as a man who hangs himself."
That is so harsh.
It is. Someone even set his newly growing forest on fire. If you're listening to this, just imagine figuring out a way to keep your house from burning down in a massive wildfire, and your whole neighborhood just shuns you for it.
What's fascinating here is the social dynamics at play. We have this romanticized notion that innovation is always universally welcomed, right?
Right, especially when it solves an existential threat.
Exactly. But innovation that challenges the status quo inherently threatens the social hierarchy. Yakuba was operating outside the accepted norms of local traditions.
And he was ignoring the experts.
Yes, he was completely ignoring the directives of the international authorities. By simply surviving when everyone else was failing, his success became a direct indictment of their failure.
But I want to push back on the international authorities here for a second because, auditing their position, we can't just paint them as clueless villains.
Fair enough.
I get that the zai method works brilliantly on a micro level, but surely it has a ceiling. If you're a global aid organization trying to feed millions of people, you can't scale a single guy with a shovel. Why wouldn't we want mechanized large-scale farming if it saves human labor and maximizes output?
And that is the exact debate the agronomists had. But the problem with scaling up via mechanization in a fragile environment like the Sahel is that topsoil is a living organism.
It's an ecosystem, not just dirt.
Exactly. When you drag heavy steel plows through it to maximize efficiency, you are ripping apart the delicate subterranean mycorrhizal fungi networks that hold the soil together. You expose the moisture to the sun,
which dries it out faster.
Yes, mechanization works wonderfully in the deep, heavy soils of the American Midwest. But applying that same template to the thin, brittle soils of sub-Saharan Africa just accelerates desertification.
It's a flawed migration strategy. You can't just copy-paste a system into a different environment.
Exactly. Yakuba proved that speed and scale are useless if the underlying ecosystem collapses under the weight of your tools.
And the proof became impossible to ignore. By 1989, the word had spread enough that 13 farmers traveled all the way from neighboring Niger to inspect Yakuba's fields.
They wanted to see it for themselves.
Right. They copied the zai technique and took it home. And then the very next year, in 1990, another severe drought devastated the region. And out of all the farmers in their area, only the ones who had adopted the zai pits had a harvest.
The measurable results began pouring in, and we aren't talking about marginal gains here.
Not at all.
Crop yields for zai farmers increased by 100 to 500% compared to conventional methods.
And the groundwater data, this is the part that really blew my mind. Across the region where zai pits were widely adopted, groundwater levels rose by an average of 5 meters.
That's huge.
In some specific wells, the water level came up 17 meters. 17 meters. How does digging a 6-inch hole raise the water table 50 feet underground?
It all comes down to the speed of percolation.
Okay, explain that.
Well, when rain hits a flat, compacted surface, it flashes into a flood and leaves the area within hours.
Right, the runoff.
But when millions of zai pits catch that water and force it down through those termite tunnels, the water slowly trickles through the strata of the earth over weeks and months. It actually recharges the deep aquifers.
It fills the tank back up.
Yes. Villages that historically went 8 months out of the year without a single drop of well water suddenly had a year-round reliable supply. And this resilience proved permanent.
That is real sustainability.
It is. During a catastrophic drought in 2019 that wiped out 72% of the regional corn crop, the zai farmers easily grew enough food to survive.
Which leads to a massive, glaring contradiction. Dr. Chris Ray, a scientist at the World Resources Institute, stated that Yakuba's impact on restoring the Sahel has been greater than all national and international experts taken together.
Which is an incredible statement.
It is. So if the data is this overwhelmingly positive, if it's outperforming billions in aid and PhD-level agronomy, why did it ever disappear in the first place? And why isn't it the absolute global standard today?
Well, to understand the erasure of this knowledge, you have to follow the money.
Oh, of course.
Always. Traditional agricultural wisdom rarely gets abandoned because it stops working. It gets erased because it doesn't fit into the economic models of third parties.
Right, because the Zai technique requires zero purchased inputs.
Exactly.
You don't buy synthetic fertilizers, you don't buy patented seeds from massive agribusiness corporations, you don't finance expensive tractors.
Who buy nothing.
You just need local soil, local manure, local labor, and a shovel. You are essentially sidestepping a $200 billion annual global fertilizer market.
And if we trace this back historically, the initial erasure actually happened during the colonial period.
How so?
Well, when French and British administrators arrived in the Sahel, they observed these carefully constructed, hand-dug pits and just dismissed the entire practice as primitive gardening.
Because it didn't look like European farming.
Right. And they needed the colonies to feed European textile mills and markets. So they actively dismantled traditional subsistence polycultures and forced the local populations to grow monoculture cash crops, primarily cotton and peanuts.
And cash crops are notoriously brutal on soil nutrients. They just extract without replenishing, which keeps the local farmers economically dependent on the colonial system to buy fertilizers just to keep the dirt alive.
Exactly. It breaks the chain of generational knowledge.
Okay, zooming forward to the modern era, you'd think today's international NGOs, who generally mean well and want to end famine, would pivot the second they saw those 1990 drought results.
You would hope so, wouldn't you? But this is the trap of the aid industrial complex.
Okay, lay it out for me.
Think about how massive bureaucracies function. For those of you listening right now, think about your own corporate jobs. When there is a massive operational problem, nobody gets promoted for proposing a solution that costs $0 and requires no new software.
Huh. That is painfully true.
It's the exact same in global aid.
Right. You cannot write a lucrative $50 million grant proposal for teaching farmers how to dig holes using a shovel they already own.
You really can't.
You can't justify high consultant fees or international flights for that.
Precisely. The modern NGO funding cycle requires measurable financial inputs. They need to show donors that they procured X amount of machinery, partnered with Y Agricultural Corporation, and distributed Z tons of proprietary seeds.
They need transactions.
Yes. Teaching a decentralized, free, indigenous method doesn't generate the economic activity that justifies the existence of the bureaucracy. The system inherently privileges techniques that generate complex financial transactions over techniques that simply generate food.
And the sources even point out that today, companies are actively trying to monetize Yakuba's method by inventing motorized Zai diggers.
Which is just absurd.
It completely defeats the entire biological purpose. Now you've introduced a heavy machine that compacts the soil, costs money, requires diesel fuel, and inevitably breaks down in the desert.
Instead of a shovel that lasts a lifetime.
Exactly. It is the ultimate example of the global economy trying to figure out how to package, patent, and sell a solution that nature was already providing for free.
It really is.
So against this massive global economic machine that is practically designed to erase non-profitable methods, how did Yakuba ensure this knowledge actually survived?
By making it entirely open source.
I love that.
Yakuba operated on a very specific philosophy. He said, if you stay in your own little corner, all your knowledge is of no use to humanity.
That's a beautiful way to look at it.
It is. He didn't lock his methods behind a consultancy fee. He didn't try to patent the specific dimensions of his pits. He hosted markets and training sessions, teaching anyone who would listen entirely for free for 40 years.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Well, the deep dive sources actually lay out Yakuba's exact blueprint. If you have a patch of dry, compacted soil where the water just runs off, you can literally try this in your own backyard.
The instructions are remarkably straightforward, but the timing is crucial.
Right, so here's the blueprint. First, wait for the dry season. Do not wait for the rain.
That's the most important part.
Take a shovel and dig a pit about 20 to 30 centimeters wide, that's roughly 8 to 12 inches, and go about 6 inches deep. When you pull that dirt out, place it on the downhill side of the pit to form a small, crescent-shaped berm.
And that little earthen wall is what's going to catch the water running down the slope.
Next comes the vital biological trigger. You place a handful of compost or manure directly into the dry pit.
Remember, the goal in this phase isn't to feed a plant.
Right, it is to call the biology back to dead Earth.
Yes, you are extending an invitation to the insects and the microorganisms to come do the heavy lifting of aerating the soil. And then you just wait for the rain.
Once the rains come and the moisture is captured deep in those insect tunnels, that is when you plant your seeds.
And the results of this blueprint compound exponentially. In year 1, your crop yields jump.
Yeah.
By year 5, the local water table actually begins to rise. And by year 20, you achieve what Yakuba achieved.
Which brings us to Bangaraga.
Yes, Bangaraga.
That is the name of Yakuba's masterpiece. In the local Masi language, it translates to the forest of wisdom.
And it isn't a myth.
Not at all. It is a 40-hectare, thriving, dense woodland that grew straight out of a barren desert landscape.
It's incredible.
You can look at satellite imagery right now and see Bangaraga. It appears as this stark, vibrant patch of deep green, completely surrounded by an ocean of brown, dying deserts.
It's the beacon of life.
Yeah. Yakuba passed away recently, in December 2023. But his family is still there, protecting that forest from city developers who, ironically, are trying to pave over it for real estate.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Yakuba's life proves something incredibly humbling about humanity's relationship with the planet. Nature does not care about our billions of dollars in international aid.
It really doesn't.
It doesn't care about our heavy-duty diesel tractors, our PhD agronomy degrees, or our sophisticated grant proposals. When it comes to healing the soil, nature only cares about water.
Just water.
And biology will always find a way to manage that water if we are humble enough to provide the right invitation.
Well, it has been a wildly eye-opening journey today, and we want to thank you for joining us on this digital stroll to unpack the legacy of Yakuba Sawadogo, a man who walked into the U.S. Capitol in a brown smock, having completely out-engineered the greatest agricultural minds in the world, simply by understanding the harmony of a shovel, some compost, and the patience to wait for the rain.
It's an incredible legacy. And this raises an important question for all of us to reflect on, one that extends far beyond farming. We have seen how incredibly effective traditional wisdom was nearly erased, simply because it couldn't be monetized by complex bureaucracies. Looking at your own life, your own industry, or your own community, what other highly effective primitive solutions are we actively ignoring today simply because nobody can figure out how to package them up and sell them back to us?